Okay. Hello, audience. Good evening, good morning, and good afternoon. This is Ifat Fatima, and I welcome you all to the Applied Anthropology Dialogue-5. Today, we are privileged to have Professor Dr. James Mcdonald with us. He is such a familiar figure in anthropology and other social disciplines, so we all know about him more or less. So I'm giving a very short introduction about him. So Professor James H. McDonald most recently served as Provost and Professor of Anthropology at the University of Montevallo, Alabama's public liberal. He worked in humanities and social sciences at Southern Utah University. He has 30 years of fieldwork experiences in rural Mexico and the Maya Western Highlands of Guatemala. Much of his research centers on problems concerning rural economic development, inequality, globalization, power governance dynamics, and the anthropology of higher education. He has published a lot of articles and books. His co-edited volume, Crisis of Governance in Maya Guatemala, Indigenous Responses to a Failing State-Owned Association of Education in Journalism and Mass Communication, Knudsen Latin American Prize. And we have Professor A.K. Mazhar Islam with us. We all know about him. He's the Professor of Anthropology of Shahjalan University of Science and Technology. He is the adjunct professor at James P. Grant School of Public and holds the position of Executive Director, Institute of Applied Anthropology. He has taught in many universities in home and abroad for so many years. So today, Professor A.K. Mazhar Islam will go on a dialogue with Professor Dr. James McDonald. So dear audience, you can ask your queries or any question to both of the discussants. It is a great opportunity to have a diversified explanation from them. So now I would like to ask Professor A.K. Mazhar Islam to start the dialogue.
Thank you. Wow, Ifat, what an introduction. I mean, it was great. So thank you for doing this job repeatedly for Institute of Applied Anthropology. You did a real good job. James McDonald, welcome you here in this small platform. We call it Anthropublic, where we disseminate our, or you can call it a broadcasting thing that we do from Anthropublic and Institute of Applied Anthropology and from our own Facebook groups. So welcome to the show, Jimmy.
Well, I got to tell you, I'm just honored to be here and happy to beam out to your world, and I'm really excited to do it. And of course, I'm always really excited to talk about applied anthropology and the great things we can do in the world to help better and change it.
Great. So we have got 8 public university. We call it. I mean, just that's probably you have heard about it. That's the public funded universities in Bangladesh where anthropology is taught, and also we have got some private universities where anthropology has got a separate discipline, and so altogether we have got around 10-11 anthropology disciplines in this country in Bangladesh. And as you know, we have got so many other disciplines allied. I mean, kind of social science discipline like sociology, I mean, political science, economics, and all other social science disciplines in different universities in Bangladesh. Anthropology is also taught in this region very seriously in India and in Pakistan, in Sri Lanka, and some other parts of this region. You know it very well. And so let us just start with asking you about a very basic kind of a question that the audience are very interested to hear about. That, you know, there are anthropologists called a serious academic anthropologist, professionals who work like you, started his career in an academic platform. I mean, in a department of a university, and then many of them has got their kind of a different assignment in some applied field, and so so it's a little tricky to say which is, you know, when somebody teaches, he or she is also practicing the discipline by teaching someone. So, you know,
absolutely,
that's kind of an interesting thing, that how those fine lines are determined. We know there is a big kind of a field branch that was developed after Second World War, which is called applied anthropology. But would you like to shed some light on the fine difference between the academic, applied, practicing, professional, whatever you want to say? I mean, what are the fine lines of it?
Sure, I think it's a great question. And, you know, in many ways, we're all applied anthropologists, right? Because, you know, we're applying our ideas to the real world in one way or another. But, you know, I think about this a lot because I think we tend to make artificial distinctions in anthropology between applied and academic and so forth, and even practicing, which I think is a somewhat different category. And so I reflect back on it and think, you know, if you look at, hang on, I've got some barking dogs I need to take care of. 3 seconds.
Guys. No worries, barking dogs seldom bite, so, you know, no worries about that.
Oh my goodness! Sorry for the intrusion of those wild animals.
No. That's fine, and we know that barking dogs seldom bite, so you know.
Yeah. So anyway, getting back, so you know, when I think of Franz Boas, I think of somebody who was academic. I think of someone who was applied. I think of someone who was into advocacy, all bundled into one, and that's foundational to at least the Americanist version of anthropology. And I think we oftentimes forget about that. You know, I look at Boas, you know, the man must have been brilliant, right? Who wouldn't like to have a cup of coffee with Franz Boas, right? I mean, I'm all in on that one. And, you know, here's a person who took his anthropological knowledge and institutionalizes the discipline, right? That had never been institutionalized previously. You had a bunch of errant anthropologists running around in museums, by and large, and he institutionalizes us. He understands that you have to create graduate programs to produce and reproduce the discipline. His students then go out and found other anthropology departments. It's a pretty remarkable story, you know, headed up by one person. And so in a certain sense, he's the embodiment of all of us, I think, in that, you know, if you take my own background, for example, I was trained in a very traditional academic anthropology program. We did not utter the word applied anywhere in the hallways there. And yet many of us became applied anthropologists. And I think we became applied anthropologists because we saw the power of the application of our ideas and methods to help deal with real world problems, you know, at least struggle with them. I dare to say the word solution because I think oftentimes we work in worlds where there are no real solutions. But it's powerful to understand why that is and what the dynamics are. And so how that all came about for me really was my own engagement working in rural Mexico, where people really struggle. I mean, you see it all around you as well. I mean, rural people really struggle. And I could see, you know, early on my work looked at the intersection of household economics and development and how the emergence of class comes about. You know, really pretty applied stuff. And then, of course, I'm doing it right on the cusp of the North American Free Trade Agreement. And you could see this massive change coming. And, you know, farmers who had never had to deal with globalized markets and those, you know, incredibly hostile economic environments that those bring were right on the cusp of doing it. The irony of my own work is that I was working with small capitalist farmers. And just as a sidebar there, I was told more than once that what I was doing was not anthropological, right? Because these were capitalist farmers, right? You can appreciate the irony of that. And so they were the ones who were supposed to be pre-adapted to this new globalizing world. And they were the ones who were supposed to be pre-adapted to this new economic reality. And they were anything but that. And so, you know, I continued to look at how they were attempting to understand, adapt to, and cope with, or maybe the best word is just confront, this new globalized reality. And from there, I ended up working on some other distinctly very, very clearly applied projects in Western Mexico, with not terribly dissimilar farmers, even poorer, and we were trying to figure out how we could better situate them in markets and help them, earn a decent livelihood, and not get swept up in the big migrant streams into the United States. And I could go on, but for me, it was a real passion to try to engage these sometimes solutionless problems and come up with our best ways of dealing with them and helping people.
Okay, great. So do you think that, although we know that there are some kind of a legacy or history that Margaret Mead's husband Gregory Bateson was once assigned for a CIA kind of an assignment to work somewhere, and even Pritchard's when he went to do that famous ethnographical noir that was basically not meant to do a kind of an ethnography, but it had a different agenda. And we know that there are some other big figures in anthropology who did some work which was not kind of intended to do a very clean kind of a academic kind of an intention, rather than from a particular special assignment. So do you think the special assignment is anthropology should take those, or just to refuse those at the first place? What's your take on that?
My take is one of refusal, and I think we have to be extremely cautious about who we work for and with. I'm in kind of the enviable position. I've always just sort of worked for myself, and I've also worked on some other funded projects, but they were all very clearly funded by known government entities. And I think it's on us as researchers to do our due diligence and to be particularly cautious about doing work in hotspots, and how we can get, sort of tied into, I think some rather, how to best put it, some rather questionable circumstances. So, and we're smart academics. We know how to use Google. These things can be really sleuthed out. So, but I do think it's on the academics, and what you're largely talking about kind of happened, way pre-Google. But I also think people were not being as mindful as they should have been. Right. And who knows what their politics were. Maybe they were perfectly mindful. I can't talk about their intentionality. But I think today we've all now been really schooled in this, right? The Vietnam War, some anthropologists got involved in that in nefarious ways. We could fast forward to, these various wars that we seemingly unendingly fight in the Middle East, where anthropologists have gotten very intentionally involved, human terrains, research. And that's yet again a whole other discussion. So, these are really interesting, vexing questions. And I think, sometimes the answers are complicated, right? I think the human terrains conversation is particularly complicated.
Right. And James, what's about the advocacy issue that we have seen that some applied anthropologists need to work for the people whom they have been working for a long time, and there are cases of safeguarding their interest, going to the courts and some other places where they can advocate or testimony on behalf of the population. They have been working for a long time, and how, and there is another kind of a pressure of the working NGOs or some other parties for whom they have been working. So anthropologists, many a times they need to have a very delicate kind of a position to deal with this, because they need to safeguard the interest of the people whom they have been working, and also they have got some kind of a donor or an organization for whom they have been working. And so how to balance those things? I mean, isn't it very tricky?
Yes, it can be. It can be. I've never found it to be terribly tricky, but I've always worked in environments that were very straight up and supportive. So just to begin, I would take us back to now a fairly old book by Conrad Kotak called Putting People First. And, ethically, this is what we do. And, it's our own ethical and moral oath. And if we lose sight of that, we're in real trouble. So we always put people first. I think anytime you feel that the situation could be compromised, that your data is so touchy and sensitive and that you're bumping into situations that could be construed as litigious or worse, right? I think there are all kinds of ways to code our work and safeguard identities and blind them to outsiders. With that said, anthropologists have been hauled into court, and they've been held in contempt for not revealing, their coded colleagues. I won't use the word informant, which sounds itself a little shifty. So, our colleagues out there, and so it goes, right? I think we hold a deep moral and ethical obligation to them, really at all costs, because they're putting themselves on the line as well. Absolutely. And so I think that, there are a lot of people who get, especially the academic side of anthropology, who get very jumpy about the notion of advocacy, right? Because that's taking a very clear political stance. And I would argue we're always taking a political stance, whether it's explicit or implicit. And if they think they're not taking a political stance, they've got another thing coming, right? Of course they are, by the very theoretical positions that they're taking. And if they choose not to recognize that, so be it. And so I just see advocacy as an extension of what we do and how we do it. And frankly, it's just being honest, right? We're just, in fact, labeling what we're doing. We're making it explicit. We're not hiding a bunch of stuff. And we're taking responsibility and accountability. So, I think folks who take an advocacy position, good for them, right? They're really being honest about what they do.
So, James, when you take the advocacy stand on it, I mean, when you are doing something with the population that you have been working, is that question of so-called objectivity kind of a thing down there? I mean, so that you need to be all those old paradigm of being totally objective, not being that empathized, or but we know it for sure that anthropology deals much on the empathy issue as well. I mean, we need to be also empathic to the population that we have been working to. Yeah. So isn't it that another tricky thing, that the question of objectivity and subjectivity thing?
Yes and no. That's a great question, by the way, and I may give you an answer that might surprise you a little bit. Again, I was trained in this very traditional academic program. We were all objective, and all of that stuff. And of course, when you actually really do field work, we are the instrument of measure. Therefore, objectivity right out of the horse box gets challenged. I mean, that's all there is to it. We are the measure, or the measuring tool. And so, this illusory false binary between objectivity and subjectivity melts away pretty quickly. But here's where I'm going to take an interesting turn that you might not expect. And so, again, being trained in this very traditional academic program, I took a tremendous amount, thank goodness, may I add, of research design and methods. Thank you very much. And so from a research design perspective, one of the ways you can hold your subjective self in check and keep your subjective self accountable is through a research design, right? A research plan. You know what you're going to do, how you're going to do it, and why you're going to do it. you lay out that plan and how ideas drive your methods for obtaining the data and work that you feel sheds light on your problem in interesting and provocative ways. And what I particularly love about a decent research design is that you also then know why you're breaking away from it, right? And rationale for pivoting away, other than just some random event. And so it creates a much more kind of rationalized approach to doing field work. So even if there's a false binary between objectivity and subjectivity, research design at least gives us some foundation for keeping our own biases in check. And I would go on and say, we're all cultural creatures, right? I mean, we're all, for crying out loud. And I think what anthropology does is it very consciously reminds us that we need to be checking in on that all the time, right? I think more than any discipline I can think of, we have reflexivity kind of baked in to the anthropological pie. Now, whether we really are good at reflexivity or not is another open question, but at least we pose the question, and good for us, by the way.
Do you think the IRB thing can do something to do with that we need to have that double IRB? I mean, one from the institution, another from the party from or the country where you work, so that IRB can safeguard some of the issues. The
whole IRB thing. I've been really lucky. I never had any IRB hangups, but and my work's pretty straightforward. But typically, at least in the United States, IRB rules and regulations are really driven by the National Institute of Health, right? The NIH, the really sciencey folks. And do they not understand anthropology. And they really they get very uneasy with participant observation, informed consent, a whole host of challenges that people in the world of bench science really don't have to contend with in the way we do. And I mean, just a simple case in point, if you're doing kind of touchy research on, let's say, something like HIV/AIDS, a lot of folks aren't going to want to sign a consent form and go on record. And so, we might say, well, we're going to do recorded informed consent, and that gets people jumpy and oh boy. So, I'm a big believer in checks and balances and certainly shedding light on what we do and how we do it. I wish in many instances it were more disciplinarily informed. But that's just the world we have to navigate. And I think we have to learn to be better advocates for ourselves rather than grump about how people should understand us better. And I think, just in terms of anthropology in general, I think we have to be better self-advocates to tell people clearly about what we do, how we do it, what the value of it is, what the power of it is, rather than just either assume they're going to get it or be mad when they don't.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Thanks so much, James. We're shifting our discussion to another kind of topic now, which is, can you give some of the examples that comes to your mind or you see, because you have been working in so many places around the globe. What are some trusting areas where applied anthropologists can work, and or you have seen working them? What are some of the most interesting areas where they can navigate and they have been working?
Oh boy, let me.
I know that's a big question, but I mean, to be very precise, I mean,
we have value everywhere, because we really get the on the ground reality of people's day-to-day lives, and certainly we can have quantitative data in that regard, but we're also really, really good at telling people's compelling stories. And really, as you know, it's people's stories that hook people emotionally, you know. And if we use those stories in a broader theoretical framework, it's incredibly powerful. Again, you know, always putting people first. But let me just draw a little bit from my own grab bag, because I've had some really wildly variable experiences in the applied world. And, you know, we've already talked about my early rural development research, which was academic applied anthropology, right, without a doubt. And subsequent to that, I worked on another rural development project, very long-term, multi-sited development project in West Mexico. And this, again, this tends to surprise people. Our starting concept, we were working with dairy farmers. Who doesn't love dairy farmers? And we're working with these poor dairy farmers, and the key concept was milk quality. Like, what the heck, right? And but you know, quality is one of these really interesting sliding signifiers. It's highly contested. People are fighting over it, what it means. It has all kinds of implications into farming practices. It has all kinds of implications into processor ideas and practices. It floats up into the global economy in very, very interesting ways. And I thought, wow, there's an interesting idea. And what we were trying to do was figure out how we could better situate these farmers in the regional economy so that they could, in fact, survive. And you know, so it was I mean, people's lives were in the lurch here, right? And I will say, we never came up with great solutions because the problems were so systemic and endemic and kind of a macro nature, right? In terms of the market for milk and the nature of regional processors. And I was working in an archly corrupt place. So you couldn't understand the economics without understanding the politics of corruption, which drove the economics. And it was at that point I kind of shifted from being more of an economic anthropologist to being, you know, putting my other hat on as more of a political anthropologist, because it was politics that drove the entire thing. And it was politics that drove and maintained relations of poverty. And so we were fighting against, you know, and struggling against these forces much larger than us, who had deeply, deeply vested interests in keeping these farmers literally dirt poor. And it was a real education in the frustration of finding solutions, but we tried, you know, we tried. And when I first got there, I would talk to farmers about quality. I try not to even talk about it, to even bias them, but they would look at me as if, you know, what are you talking about? What quality? What's this thing, right? We just produce milk and, you know, nobody's ever died, kind of thing. And by the time we were done, you know, I'd have farmers talking to me about milk fat and solids and protein and, you know, a bacteria count and all kinds of things. So, you know, we had certainly changed the way people were beginning to think about what they did and how they did it, hopefully for the better. But what we couldn't change was the kind of the macro political economy in which they were inserted, and was not of their doing whatsoever, right? And, you know, they're stuck in material structures not of their doing, as Marx would say, right? And the dominant forces had very, very little interest in changing any of that. They were not putting people first. If I look at, let me take another couple of just small examples, right? The funny things that happen in your life. I did a very interesting 2-week visiting professor gig with the Advertising Educational Foundation in New York City. This is a kind of a watchdog, advertising watchdog group.
Wow, that's something very new. I mean, you know, like, you know, anthropologists working in that advertisement company. Yes.
And I actually teach advertising in a couple of my classes, and because I find it a very nefarious kind of process. You know, it's really, you know, an industry that produces desire. It's like, oh, great, right? Capitalist desire. And so when I saw this opportunity, I snapped at it because I thought, man, I want to see how this really works on the inside. And so the Advertising Educational Foundation used to have a program, and they still may, where they would place academics in large advertising firms in New York City, primarily, also Chicago and Los Angeles. And they would connect us with a particular advertising account, and we could become these insiders. It was amazing. It was absolutely amazing. And so I ended up being placed at Ogilvy and Mather, which is this massive advertising juggernaut in New York City. At the time, they had American Express, they had BP Oil, they had a number of just massive accounts, Dove, the soap, just all kinds. And they put me with a coffee account, a commodity coffee account, Maxwell. Okay. And I thought, who drinks Maxwell House? Not me. And it was just fascinating working with these people, because how do you take a commodity and differentiate it from other commodities, right? And so, you know, their task was an incredibly difficult one. And I got to watch them try to do this, and it really schooled me as well on the whole advertising process, which most of us really don't conceptualize very well. And I'll never forget, I've got a couple of different stories here, but I sat with one of the big bosses one day over coffee, not Maxwell House. And we were talking about the process, and this was an incredibly smart woman, and she would sort of sling around the Marxist lingo, and I thought, well, she's hip, she gets it, she gets what the industry's all about. And I said, well, Carol, you know, how do you rationalize producing desire through advertising? And she looked at me like I'd slapped her. I mean, I'm not kidding. And I thought, oh no, I did not mean to offend this person, because she's like super, I love her. And she looked at me and she said, and this is close to a quote, she said, oh, no, I just give people what they want. And I thought, oh, now there's a rationalization. That's how you go home at night. You just give people what they want. Oh man, wow, very, very interesting. But then I went to their human resources department. Doesn't that sound sexy, right? It's a little trip to HR. And they were great. I loved them. And I said, look, I'm going to have students that will ask me about how they get involved in advertising. And you know, what the job prospects are, how you get there. And they said, look, and I said, by the way, I've noticed that the 20-somethings around me, because it is a young person's industry, right? And I've said, I've noticed all the people around me, you know, they're English majors and psychology majors and anthropology majors and sociology majors and you name it majors in the humanities and social sciences. I haven't seen anybody in business. And they said, oh, that's easy. That's easy. That's an easy question. We, in fact, are interested in hiring people who are interested in what makes people tick. Boom. Right? And it's like suddenly I'm sitting up straight, right? And they said, yeah, that's what we want. That's a person's passion. You can't train somebody to be interested in other people and how they see the world and understand it and act on it. And so typically those people who are passionate about the human condition are coming out of the humanities and social sciences. And they said, and by the way, all the better, because we can train them on the technical skills of advertising. In fact, we want to do that. So if you're coming out of a business marketing advertising background, you're going to come with what you think is already an operative skill set. And then we have to undo that and retrain them, which is really costly. So we'd actually prefer somebody who comes in with a passion for people, and then we train them to do the other stuff our way. Right? I thought that was just, you know, kind of remarkable. And so indeed, I think we forget how many anthropologists, again, we could go into the ethics and morals of advertising, but we forget about how many anthropologists are actually employed in those fields because we're passionate about what makes people tick. And we're good at it, right? We're good at getting at it and talking about it and representing it and telling stories about it. I would also remind us that the single largest employer of anthropologists in the world is Microsoft. Period. Microsoft.
Okay.
Isn't that amazing?
We didn't know about that
Yeah.
much.
It's amazing. And so I think we've got these really interesting, useful skill sets that look at, you know, how people sort of interact with material things, how people interact with technologies. We're very, very good at it. So
you mean the human relationship factors? I mean, that's the main area of concentration?
Yes, absolutely. Okay. And then sort of my final experience that I'll draw from, and this really took me to school, and this is fairly recent, working in Guatemala, rural Guatemala, the Mayan Western Highlands, very poor, very indigenous. And I was working with a non-governmental organization, an NGO, called People for Guatemala. If anybody wants to look them up, they are awesome. And I say that quite intentionally, not gratuitously, quite intentionally, because there are many really bad NGOs in Guatemala, right, that just take advantage of people and steal a bunch of money, and it's real, and leave people, you know, hanging. But this is a great NGO, and they work with Rotary International, of which I'm a member, right? I'm a big believer in Rotary, right? One of the world's largest non-governmental development organizations going, right? Putting people first all the time. And so I connected with them through Rotary and was doing direct participatory development. And I'll never forget, the director and owner of this NGO says to me, "You academics," and I thought, oh no, here it comes. Oh, heaven help me. And she goes, and I liked her, so I was going to sit and take this. I was going to take it. Oh, and she says, "You academics, all you do is you come to places like Guatemala and you talk to people and you write it up and you write it for other academics and you don't help a soul." And I thought, wow, perhaps guilty as charged. Wow, that hurts. Now, I would say we advocate for people in ways that they themselves could never advocate. And we talk to audiences to which they do not have access, right? And we try to represent their world and their reality and their struggles. Okay, but still guilty as charged. And she said, yeah, I mean, it's direct participatory development. That's the only thing that's ever going to change anything down here, period. And I kind of went, oh, no, you know, come on, you're being a little harsh. And what I came to realize is that Guatemala is so historically dysfunctional. I mean, it really is a colonial country, albeit in the post-colonial guise, right? It is a democracy, but not really one. And so, you know, basically it's a colonial country still with colonial dynamics, levels of racism that were just shocking, and levels of poverty that were remarkable. And I began to realize that, in fact, we couldn't change the larger macro political economy. It's just baked in and archly dysfunctional. And there's no undoing that. And so, in fact, the best way we could help people was by directly helping them out in their homes and communities, and which is what we were doing. And so the deal was we would get, you know, large global grants from Rotary and elsewhere that would help fund direct development in these communities, right? And so the community would put in resources, whether it was largely in-kind labor, right, of which there is a lot in those communities, and largely in-kind manual labor, because that's all they've got. Sometimes it would be money, but much more rarely. And then we would do a match of something like a 75-25 match. But everybody had resources in the game. And then we would do very simple, impactful things like cement dirt floors, right? Because as you know, dirt floors are a public health disaster. You can never clean them, right? So they are disease vectors like nobody's business. Typically then, right behind the cement floor, we would put in what they call a Cioppino stove, which is, just a small wooden stove. They're high efficiency, and you can flue the smoke outside. So, most rural Mayan people cook over open fires. And of course, they're breathing in all of that shockingly toxic wood smoke. It's getting in their eyes. And of course, the kind of, what would you call it? I guess it's kind of the double exploitation is, that it's not only affecting people, it's particularly affecting women, right? Who do the cooking and the kids on their backs and so forth. Most of this awful stuff. And so we would put in these Cioppino stoves. And one of the folks with this NGO had designed this particular stove. It was extremely high efficiency. It was very inexpensive. And we would put these things in, and we could build one in about a half hour if you got really good at it. And I kid you not, Mazhar, women would be crying as we were putting these things in. They would just be crying. And I would say to the students that were with us, because we would always bring students with us, right? And I'd say to the students, it's like, this is tectonic. This technology is tectonic. And this is like wheeling in the first computer into your house, right? Or the first TV or whatever. It's that life-changing, right? And we do, lots of other things as well. We painted schools and schools that had never had any tender, loving care forever. We teach classes to the kids. It was really remarkable stuff. In one community, we put in a playground, right? Which may sound kind of odd, but I'll guarantee you it was the only playground for 300 miles. Because you don't get them in those rural communities. And the kids went nuts, right? They knew exactly what to do with that playground. And it was just, just amazing. Yeah. So, I've had a lot of different experiences in this from, one of being a very academic applied anthropologist, kind of doing my thing and sort of alighting across, sort of different kinds of applied experiences. And certainly in some contexts, I'm absolutely convinced that direct participatory development is the only answer. And
I'm sure that's give you a lot of pleasure as well. When you, get seen by your own witness that life is changing in the community. So that's probably give you a lot of pleasure in personally and professionally as well. And of course, if it doesn't work well, probably there are some pains as well. So that both pains and pleasure works together, isn't it?
Yeah, it's of course. Not everything works, but you give it your best try. But I would also come back and say that, especially if you're working with groups like Rotary, the emphasis is on sustainability. So we do things that are only very clearly sustainable. We don't fall into that development trap where we're doing things that are archly unsustainable and damaging and awful and, with unintended consequences. We do very simple, sustainable work. The group I work with, their two main things are clean water and sanitation. So we do these big clean water projects. And we have to be able to demonstrate at least 10 years of sustainability in the project. And I could go into, the complexities of these things, but they're really, really interesting. And so we get clean water into communities because if you talk to women, not men, but if you talk to the women, they'll say, what's your biggest problem? They'll say, I'm sick of my kids being sick all the time, right? Because they're drinking that bad water, right? From sketchy sources. And the guys, they'd say, well, I need a job and, that sort of thing. But the women are really dialed into public health, right, in ways that men are not. But then, of course, what this NGO would point out is that Sanitation is the flip side of the coin and the flip side of the problem, because if you don't have adequate sanitation, you're going to keep polluting the water, right? And polluting the water table. So they try to do those two things in tandem. And when I talk about sanitation, I'm talking about things like composting toilets, right? I mean, again, not complicated technologies, very doable things, and things that our team, in collaboration with our Mayan colleagues, can construct pretty quickly, right? You just have to have the community buy-in and the will. And, you know, we were moving mountains, right, in terms of people's day-to-day experiences and people's day-to-day well-being.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you. And you know, of course, I mean, these are the very important little things that we always need to consider. I mean, when we do whatever we want to do. And now, you remember that one question that comes in the Facebook about that fourth industrial revolution that I tagged you.
Yes.
That what could be the future kind of a anthropological role in the next, in future, when it comes to, you know, we're already in the era of fourth industrial revolution. So what is your take on that?
I love that question, by the way. I thought that was just a rocking question. But before we get there, let's not forget to go back to your very, very good observation about teaching and education being applied. And I'd love to circle back to that a little bit later if we could, because you're right on. I mean, that may be the most applied thing I've ever done, you know. How many students I had flow through the classroom? Hopefully, lives I've touched. But anyway, to the fourth industrial revolution question, whoever asked that, thank you so much. And it was such a cool question. And what I would say to that is, so, you know, if you think about it, the first industrial revolution, you know, kind of steam and coal and all of that terrible greenhouse gas polluting stuff that we're still struggling with, and heaven help us if we don't deal with that problem, right? And then, you know, you go through other revolutions, and then you kind of get into the information technology, robotics revolution, which I think is really interesting, because if you've ever gone to a modern industrial car plant, for example, and we have some of those in the state of Alabama, so they let you go visit, right? And they're fascinating. They're robots, you know, doing their robot thing. And of course, what you see in these plants are people everywhere, right? Because the robots break down, and there's still a lot of stuff the robots can't do, right? So there are people everywhere, you know, in these plants doing whatever their thing is. And so the fourth industrial revolution really, you know, should have all our attention, because it's the digital revolution. It's the artificial intelligence revolution, right? And of course, the question always is, when are the robots going to be telling us what to do, right? And putting us to work, and, you know, keeping us honest, and you know, not fighting one another, and so forth. And I look at that and I think, you know, it's such an interesting challenge. Depending on who you read, of course, you know, all of these technological changes are going to have massive economic impacts, right, on the world. They're both going to, speaking of cancel culture, you know, there's going to be job cancel culture all over the place. But of course, it's going to create all kinds of new jobs. And, you know, so I look at my undergrads, and I think even grad students, but certainly undergraduates, and I think, you know, I can't even begin to imagine the job you're going to have 10 years from now, because it hasn't been created yet. It doesn't exist. And, you know, so one of the things I'm really committed to is a kind of liberal education model, where students are trained very deeply and broadly with lots of transferable skills, you know, good communication skills, good research skills, good analytical skills, cross-cultural skills, you name it. All those are going to be incredibly necessary. And as I look at this new technological wave coming over us, you know, very clearly and I don't even want to use the word job, but certainly the careers that are going to be the really powerful ones are in the creative economy. And those are the jobs that you cannot reproduce through robotics and through AI, at least yet, right? And that's where I think we can have the most impact for our students, because we all know these technologies shape our worlds, they shape our lives, they shape our ideologies, they create opportunity structures, and they collapse others. And I think, you know, we really need to make students aware of this, but as an applied anthropologist, I mean, this is a thing that needs to be studied deeply for its human effects and what it's going to do to us, right? So just in terms of kind of predicting the economy, if I could do that, by the way, you know, I'd buy an island and retire. But if we could predict, you know, the economic futures, I would say the creative economy is where it's at. And of course, those drudge jobs, you know, kind of repetitive activity, drudge jobs, those jobs that can be automated, boy, they're either going to be incredibly low paying, low wage, or they're going to be eradicated altogether. But what I see happening, at least in the near term, is this deepening inequality that's going to happen. So, you know, the folks on the creative economic side are going to be nicely taken care of because they're going to have a skill set that you can't model and that you can't create an algorithm for. And then everybody else who is going to be driven further and further into poverty, right? Until we can figure out how you train people up, assuming that even happens, which is an open question, you train people up into whatever these new economic jobs are, right? That are very different than things we look at today. And so I think it's a huge challenge. And if I were young right now, I'd be really interested, both interested and concerned at the same time, because we've got to figure out the transformative effects of these technologies and what they're going to do to our world and where we fit.
Right. And then somebody asked that, and can governance could be a very important issue for the industrial revolution? That's governance issue could be a key issue on that.
Oh boy, yeah, we've done so well at that globally, haven't we? It's just been such a startling success. Of course, I'm speaking facetiously. I think it's a huge problem. And, you know, you've got all these quote unquote sovereign nation states, you know, which are by their very nature bounded and competitive. We don't get along very well. We don't collaborate very well with one another. Look at the European Union. Oh man, what a great experiment, by the way, in collaborative governance. And they're all hating each other. And, you know, and then there's Britain, and who knows what they're up to these days with Boris Johnson. The sovereign nation state isn't well set up to collaborate. And we tend not to do it particularly well. I personally think what we need are new forms of governance structures that are much better fitted to these global problems and realities. You know, I look at things like the Paris Accords on climate change. And great attempt. I mean, my God, it's like, and who pulls out but the United States? It's like, we'll be back. We'll be back soon with the rest of the world. Thank goodness, right? Dealing with I promise, dealing with these massive problems. But it's at best, it's imperfect, right? It's incredibly imperfect. And so I do think, you know, you need some sort of larger governance system that's driven by science and not by the politicians, and that the politicians are bound to listen to. And yet, how do you create that in an environment that's wedded to the sovereign nation state? I mean,
we can take this COVID-19 situation where science and governance, you know, I mean, the political government some political government are not very much into that science thing. I mean, so they're more into their own agenda. So
yeah, I happen to live in one of those places, and it's just frightening. I mean, not to listen to the science. It's just crazy, and then to politicize and weaponize, right? What are the quite simple public health solutions, right? At least near term, right? Wear a mask, wash your hands, social distance. This is not big stuff. And we've just not done so well at it at all, and we're paying an incredibly high price. But let's think of some experiments, right, where we've tried alternative systems of governance, some of which we like, some of which we might question. But the United Nations, I mean, what a great post-World War II, institution that is attempting to deal with global problems through collaboration. What an idea, right? And we could critique the UN and so forth, but it's at least an attempt, right, to bring us all to the table together, right. Some more equal, as you know, than others. But I even think of something like the Paris climate change accords. I mean, we keep trying these things, right? And with greater or lesser buy-in. And then we might turn and pivot to things like the International Monetary Fund, right? Not exactly what you'd call, at least in the political sense of it, a governance system, but of course it is, right? It's sort of the World Economic Watchdogs. Thank you very much. Or there are many others. World Bank, right? The bank out there, right, doing its thing.
Yeah.
So we've got these alternative systems that tend to take a more global perspective. And I would say probably the challenge of the next 20 years is what's next.
Yeah.
Right? Can we in fact create something that puts people first and puts the world first? The Earth, it's all we've got, right? I don't think any of us are zooming off to Mars anytime soon. And so what we've got, and we've got to take care of it. And we've got to take care of one another. And I think it means we've got to rethink our economic models. We've got to rethink our political models. We've got to rethink our governance models. And is there the will to do that? That's a totally open question. And in fact, what event would drive that? Right? I think COVID is it's just a small window onto what's coming next. And I mean, this is it's a footnote to climate change and the kind of chaotics that's going to, in fact, begin to drive. And we're seeing it in the US, we're seeing it in India, we're seeing it in Bangladesh. We're seeing it all over. And I mean, we've had more hurricanes and tropical storms in the Gulf of Mexico this year than we've ever had, right? It's just amazing. And they come and visit Alabama fairly regularly. In fact, we're still recovering from Hurricane Zeta that came through here, what, a month ago, 3 weeks ago? They still haven't fixed all the damage. I mean, it was devastating. And so we're beginning to get a sneak peek of what's coming. And what's interesting about people in the United States, even in very conservative places like Alabama, is that the vast majority of them actually think climate change is a real thing. Right? They actually will. They'll tell you it's real. It just isn't going to affect them. That's the second clause. It's never going to affect. It won't affect me.
But Washington even don't buy that. That's a real thing. I mean, Alabama thinks that, well, this is a real thing, but that doesn't affect them. But if you think about the Washington, they don't even think that that's a real thing. They're repeatedly saying in the previous government that it's like a hoax from China or something like that.
It's pretty stunning, isn't it? But that, again, I think we're going to get into a very different discourse here. Very, very.
Yeah. That's right.
We're going to listen to the scientists, and we're going to get back to doing the hard work as opposed to the blustering and
Thank you. Thank you, James. Let us get back to some of the core issue again. I mean, like, what now? We have got this culture of webinar that we have started in this pandemic. We have observed that it takes 1 hour to have the concentration. Active. If it is go beyond 1 hour or something, people are getting kind of distracted. So we'll finish it by 10 minutes. So we can assure the audience that will not take that much of time today. But it has been such an important and engaging discussion from James Mcdonald that we cannot stop him. That's the point. So what's do you think that we need now for the students? I mean, for the undergrad and grad students, can you? I know it's a very kind of a very basic questions, but what according to you are some of the thriving qualities to become a practicing anthropologist who can work in different situations in this world? Right. What could be some of the important quality that it needs to be trained or needs to acquire at some point, or to be a good kind of a smart, good, right. Doable applied anthropologist.
Really adaptable. I think there are probably 3 or 4 things, and I'll do it really quickly. One is take a lot of coursework on research design and methods.
Okay.
Right? Methods, right, both quantitative and qualitative. It's the most useful thing I ever did, right? Okay. And of course, we need to take coursework in the kind of the idea side as well, theory and so forth. But man, our research design and methods are key if you're going to be a successful applied and practicing anthropologist. I think the second thing is networking. Right? So practicing and applied anthropologists think about their networks very differently than academics do, right? So I was never trained to go out and network with the world. I was trained to go out and network with other academics. And so networking is key. Get out in the world, I think get as much engaged experiential learning as possible. Right, out in the world doing real world projects, right, and engaging people out there. Those are the people that are going to get you the jobs, by the way, because they're going to like you, and they're going to think you're hardworking and smart, and truly, it's our networks that get us our jobs. I would say, another piece of it is understanding how these new technologies, not just AI, of course, right, artificial intelligence, but how all kinds of new technologies are going to impact us. And so, the kinds of technologies you're going to use doing applied and practicing anthropology are very different than the ones that I was trained in. I mean, I went out with a tape recorder. Remember those? It's like an analog phone, right? And we would record things, and it was pretty basic, and we transcribed them, and it was shockingly labor intensive, right? And of course, we can do things so much faster and so much better now, and you can put those interviews through all kinds of interesting software. So we're faster and better at what we do and how we do it. And then I think that the final thing, I think now I'm up to 4. So I think the final thing is learn the language of our other social science colleagues, right? Because there are more of them, and they tend to be in better situated positions of power. So we've got to learn, and this is like the language of Michael Chernia, right? Ex of the World Bank. And so what Michael Chernia would tell us is you've got to learn the language of the economists. You've got to speak their lingo because they don't care about yours, right? You've got to learn the language of the political scientists. You've got to learn the language of the sociologists, and at least have a basic understanding of what they do and how they do it. And because otherwise, they're not going to want to listen to us. even though I think we have some incredibly powerful things to say. And then fifth thing, and then I'll shut up. The fifth thing is we've got to learn how to, in fact, translate what we do and how we do it to a broader world. There are very few jobs out there. I don't know about Bangladesh. In the United States, there are almost no jobs out there with the label anthropologist on them. And so it's incumbent upon us to tell people what we do and how we do it and why it's important and why it fits whatever job they're looking for. So I'll leave that at that. That's my top 5.
Okay, all right. Thank you. That was really, really very effective. And what do you think that in the academia, I mean, what we need to do to groom those qualities? Do we need to kind of a little change in our syllabus or in our curriculum or in our classroom where we can fit them for the market? I mean, do you have any tips for that?
Oh, I've got a lot of tips. I could go on way too long, and your very sweet, kind audience would fall asleep, and I know it's late there. I think we need a lot of curricular reform. The old kind of academic model just doesn't work anymore, where undergraduates are doing senior theses. I mean, I could go on to lots of critiques about these things. Again, it's engaged learning all the way, networking. The more we can plug students into those kinds of experiences, make them part of the curriculum, make them build to some semester plus long project, right? Sustained learning project based on the real world, not the academic world, the better off we're going to be, both at the undergraduate and graduate level. And I'm not a huge believer in things like master's theses, right? I mean, that sounds like heresy, doesn't it? I mean, it's like, who cannot love a master's thesis? I'm not a big fan of dissertations. Who doesn't love those, right? I mean, I wrote one. But I don't think they're the kind of documents that are well adapted to contemporary educational and practical realities, right? Why can't students come up with internship-based projects that serve as a master's thesis? Why can't people come up with, other kinds of facsimiles for dissertations that better map where they're about to go? I also think, and here's where I'll stop because your audience is now asleep. I also think we need to very intentionally, consciously, and reflexively help train students about the skill sets they need to do non-academic kinds of work. And we, at least in the United States, we've done a very poor job of that. And basically we assume that people will just somehow miraculously and magically find their way. And that's just not the case. I mean, some people do, right? I mean, because they do. But it's not intuitive that they will do that. And I think we have not made good on our responsibility to students and their well-being and their futures.
Sure. Thank you. And my last question for you, for tonight is like, what you see the future of both academic and applied anthropology for next 50 years? I mean, what is the future that you see?
Wow. I actually am not a great optimist, and COVID is exposing all, and this is a very long discussion, but it's exposing all the weaknesses of higher education in America. And I'm sure you're seeing it in Bangladesh and in India and greater South Asia. And we're shedding the humanities and social sciences, right? It's, universities have been very neoliberalized, right? So that, things like a liberal education model are being increasingly shrunken and reduced further and reduced further. And programs in the humanities and social sciences have gone through that same reductionist process, right? And when we have good data on this, I mean, they're just being shed, and they've been shed over the last 20 years. So, and by the way, and we tend to critique the system. So big surprise that people would like to see us out of business. So I think it's going to be really tough. And I think we've got to be really smart and really savvy. And I think we've got to tailor programs for people, right? And not just some model of the way things should academically be, but rather what do students really need and how can they make an impact? So I wish I were more of an optimist on kind of the future of academic anthropology, but I think we really need to be very careful and very mindful about what that future holds. But I think the future is really bright for applied and practicing anthropology. I think we do things that nobody else does. We have skill sets that nobody else has. We have ideas that nobody else has. And so I think there will be a big role for us out in the world. And if you look at least programs, anthropology programs in the United States, the ones that are growing are applied anthropology programs.
Okay.
So I'll just leave it at that. I think that's okay. A very piece of news.
All right. Okay, great. That's kind of a great kind of a concluding remark. So if you want to ask any question, or we'll just call it a day or night or whatever you want to say.
Right. It's really a great experience to have James Mcdonald with us today, because actually I think that we have covered a lot for today.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
All right. So I really want to thank and express our gratitude to Professor Dr. James Mcdonald, who was very kind enough in a short notice to respond to our call to share some of his ideas to our audience in Bangladesh. I'm sure a lot of questions will be coming, and it will be recorded and it will be shared in. It is already there in the Facebook and other platform, and I'm sure people will come up with a lot of other questions. And I'll also like to share that to you, Jimmy, in the future. And I really, on behalf of the Institute of Applied Anthropology, I like to express once again our heartiest thanks and gratitude to you to spare your time in this morning in Nevada. I mean in Alabama, and it's about 10:12 in night in Dhaka, Bangladesh. So with this, we like to conclude from here. And last word from Ifat.
Yeah, I really thank you, Mr. James Mcdonald. Definitely, we will get you in another dialogue in future.
Great. I would
very
love
soon.
it.
Yes.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, audience. Yeah.
Yes.
It's
so thank you. Thank you very much.
Okay. Yes, I was honored to be asked, and what a great conversation. I love this platform, and a number of folks have already friended me on Facebook, and all I can say is let's keep the conversation going.
Great, great. Thank you very much, Jimmy. We'll keep in touch, and we'll see you again. Thank you.
I look forward to it.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.